Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, all by way of distilling from them lessons that we can apply to our businesses and professional practices. So today I am going to talk about perhaps the greatest individual in 20th century history, and that is Sir Winston Churchill. So most people who know about Churchill know about his being prime minister during the Second World War. He gained the premiership after Chamberlain's essentially disastrous meeting with Adolf Hitler, in which he declared there would be peace in our time through the I'm going up on the word, but through essentially giving in to many of Hitler's demands, and thereby gaining nothing of the sort. But indeed, Churchill's career and his involvement in military matters began at the end of the 19th century. And he was essentially a soldier. He as I recall, went to Sandhurst, which is the British military school, and he was a soldier, as I mentioned. He was also a journalist at documenting military affairs, as well as a civilian leader. And so today I'm going to take you through a short summary of the military aspects of Churchill's life, and then distill from them the lessons, as is the key point of this show. So, pardon me, I mentioned that Winston Churchill's military career began in the late 19th century. He was a military officer in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars. That was his unit in 1895. So in that same year, he was sent to Cuba, where he was an observer in Cuba's war for independence from Spain. And that was the first sort of military incident in his life. From there, he went to British India, and India was a colony of Great Britain at that time. And he fought with the Malacan field forces against the Pashtun tribesmen. So he got to see combat, pretty early on. And then in the Sudan in 1898, he participated in the Battle of Omdurman, where he served under Lord Kitchener, one of the famous generals in British military history. And he actually witnessed the last cavalry charge, horse-mounted cavalry charge, in British military history. And it should be noted, the Battle of Omdurman was quite a bloody battle. I've read descriptions of it, and we're talking about pistols and swords. Cavalry charges were still made with mounted horsemen with swords drawn, kind of thing, and they would slash at the enemy. Very, very, very bloody. So then, into the last year of the 19th century, 1899 through 1900. So Churchill went to South Africa, where as a journalist, he covered the Second Boer War, which lasted from 1899 to 1902. and Churchill was on a train when it was attacked by the Boers. And despite being a journalist, and not actually being assigned, part of the military at that time, he organized a defense of the train. He was not successful. He was taken captive, and he was sent to a prisoner of war camp, a POW camp. And thereafter, he made an absolutely amazing escape from this POW camp, where he snuck out and crept through South Africa. Eventually, he got on board a train hidden away in it was some sort of agricultural product that smelled horribly, and he escaped from South Africa on this train, and he became a national hero in Great Britain when his escapades became known, which as a journalist, Churchill made sure they got known. After his escape, he rejoined the British Army, and he took part in the relief of Ladysmith and Pretoria, the relief of British forces who were fighting against, basically trapped by the Boers. From there, Churchill moved out of uniformed military service and entered political life. During World War I, from 1914 to 1918, so first he served as the First Lord of the Admiralty. This would be essentially the equivalent of the Chief of Naval Operations here in the United States. And he held that position from 1911 until 1915. And he modernized the Royal Navy in preparation for World War I, which he saw coming. He saw conflict coming, basically. He also advocated, although he was First Lord of the Admiralty, he advocated for the development of the tank, and which was used a little bit in World War I. If you've heard me talk about Patton, I've talked about Patton's involvement with tanks during World War I, and of course, tanks became a crucial part of World War II warfare, and beyond that, and largely remain so today. Among the things that Churchill did during World War I is he organized the Gallipoli campaign in 1915. It was an attempt to open up a new front against the Ottoman Empire, which was a dominant power in Eastern Europe, and sort of a gateway to the Middle East. And in the event, the campaign was a major disaster for the World War I allies. There were heavy casualties, and as a result, Hitler resigned his position as First Lord of the Admiralty. Now, I think it's crucial to note that, having orchestrated this military disaster, Churchill accepted the responsibility and resigned his position. This is not something we see in the contemporary world, where politicians boldly take responsibility when they make huge mistakes. And then thereafter, in 1916, he commanded a battalion on the Western Front as a lieutenant colonel in the Royal Scots Fusiliers. So he went back into uniform, in essence. And Churchill was, at heart, an extremely patriotic Briton. And I think that he felt he couldn't stand aside, or stand on the sidelines, I should say, during World War I, when so many of his countrymen were being killed and wounded, and where I think he felt that the values of Great Britain were really on the line against what he viewed as the hegemony of Kaiser Wilhelm, and Germany, and the it was called the Central Powers in World War I, not the Axis. So thereafter, Churchill kind of was in a political wilderness for quite a while, but he eventually regained his footing in political life, and he became part of the government in the 30s. And as I mentioned in my very opening, in May of 1940, after Chamberlain's disastrous meetings with Hitler, and the the advance of Nazi Germany in Europe, Churchill was asked to become prime minister and to lead Great Britain through what he subsequently called its darkest hours. So, of the many things that Hitler is famous for in World War II, first and foremost were his speeches. We will fight on the beaches, we will fight here, and all we have to give is our blood, sweat. It's four things: blood, sweat, something, and tears. It's where the band Blood, Sweat, and Tears gets their name. But Churchill actually mentioned four qualities. He also he described the Battle of Britain as the pilots. This is their finest hour, and so many absolutely iconic speeches that he gave during World War II that really buoyed the spirits of not only his countrymen, but allies throughout the world, Americans, the French, etc. He had a way of speaking and a way of demonstrating that no matter how bleak things appeared, the Allies would, in the end, be victorious. He played a crucial role in the Battle of Britain in 1940, ensuring that the Royal Air Force was well supported against the German Luftwaffe. And he was, and where I think Churchill perhaps was most central to winning World War II was in creating the tripartite, if you will, alliance that included Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. So while the Soviet Union is credited for essentially bringing so many soldiers and other military personnel to the fight, and the United States was called the Great Arsenal of Democracy, it's well to remember that Joseph Stalin originally started out as an ally of Adolf Hitler, and they sealed a non-aggression pact in the late 1930s that ended up with the partitioning of Poland after Nazi Germany attacked and took over Poland, it wasn't until Stalin felt betrayed by Hitler that he essentially turned away from that pact. Franklin Delano Roosevelt too was a reluctant participant in what was going on in Europe. He did his best to keep America out of especially active combat. He did many things to support, in particular, Great Britain through Lend-Lease and through the convoy providing first ships to Great Britain that they could use for convoys across the North Atlantic, and later having American ships engage in those convoys as well. But it was really Churchill's diplomacy with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, despite the shameless way that Roosevelt had treated Churchill when he first met him many years before, and even during World War II. Churchill worked extremely hard to keep the alliance together, much harder than Roosevelt or Stalin ever did, and in so doing saw to it that a united front against Nazi Germany and the Axis defeated, I should say, the United Front defeated Nazi Germany and the Axis powers. So that really stands as, like I said, perhaps Churchill's greatest achievement in World War II. He was also very involved in the various campaigns during, especially the major campaigns during World War II, including the North African campaign, where he supported General Montgomery's victory at El Alamein, and the D-Day invasion in 1944, where the Allies did a coordinated landing in Normandy and began the liberation of Western Europe. And those landings were primarily American, British, and Canadian troops, although there were other Allied troops involved as well. And then, interestingly enough, after World War II was over, Churchill was basically turned out of power by his countrymen, and he eventually served another stint as prime minister. But during the post-World War II period, Churchill's influence was really in identifying that the former allied of the United States and Great Britain, Soviet Union, really posed the biggest threat to the West. He indeed coined the term Iron Curtain in a speech that he gave in 1946, and he, warned about the dangers of the rising, communist power. And then when he returned to the prime ministership in 1951, where he was until 1955, he oversaw Britain becoming a nuclear power, and he restructured the military. So this summary of Churchill's involvement in military affairs, it's short. I didn't want to go into a lot of detail. There are numerous fantastic books on Churchill's life, and those that focus on his military history. I think I have 10 or more books on Churchill's life, from full short biographies to longer complete biographies, to one book that just talks about his exploits during the Boer War, and to his relations with FDR. There are just almost unlimited marvelous books about Winston Churchill, and I can't encourage you enough to get some of these books. I will put some of the books in the show notes, so that if you're looking for specific recommendations, I'll put some there for you. And as always, when I put books in, the links will be what do you call them? There'll be links to Amazon where if you click on the link and buy something, I get a couple of pennies. So you'll see there's a little language right after the link that says paid leads. So they're affiliate links is the term I'm looking for. So, okay, so let's look at some lessons now that we can learn from the military aspects of Churchill's career. Now, by the way, you might ask, well, wait, his entire career was military. No, that's actually not the case. Winston Churchill was a writer, and in fact, most of the money he made actually came from his writing, both as a journalist and writing books. So, post World War II, he wrote a 6-volume history of World War II. It is brilliant. It is well written. People will say, well, it was, Churchill telling, his version of the war to make himself look good. Yes, I think there's some truth to that. That is what memoirs do. And I've read Eisenhower's memoir. I've read memoirs of a number of the people involved in the Pacific Theater, but none of them are as brilliantly written as Winston Churchill. He was a writer par excellence. He wrote histories. He wrote a history of Marlborough, to whom he was distantly related, and extensive writings. Although this was not a professional endeavor, he was also quite a good painter. He loved to paint, and he loved to garden as well. So he had very broad interests. He was, I think it's reasonable to say, a Renaissance man in many ways. He loved food. He loved wine, especially champagne. Man after my own heart, right? He loved whiskeys. He loved whiskey, especially whiskey and soda. And there were people who claimed that he was drunk throughout World War II. That's not the case. He drank highly diluted whiskeys and sodas. I think that's probably what helped him get through the tremendous stress of being a World War II leader. So, but focusing back now on the military aspects of his career. So, throughout all the things that he did, first of all, Churchill understood the value of leadership, and especially visionary leadership. Now, whether it was as a war correspondent leading a defense of a train in the Boer War, where he was quick to see that somebody had to take charge and try and mount a defense, or the sort of truly visionary leadership he exercised post World War II, where he worked to make the West aware of the threat posed by the Soviet Union. He saw where events needed to go, and he sought to lead other people there, not through bullying them, but through inspiring them, through explaining to them what their mutual interests were in working together to pursue whatever goals it was that he thought needed to be pursued. So whether it was essentially charming Joseph Stalin to stay on board with the Allies, whether it was overlooking the snubs by Roosevelt and proclaiming the great friendship that they had in the interest of unity among the Allies, all of these were traits of truly great leadership. And first and foremost, that is the quality that that Winston Churchill epitomizes in his military career. And if you are interested in becoming a better leader, you will find no better source for learning how to do that than reading about Winston Churchill's life. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is adaptability and learning from failure. So Churchill, he was not a gifted soldier in the sense of he was super agile or anything like that. He was not. He was not. He did his best, is what I can say. But he wasn't a natural combatant in that sense. Nor was he immune from making mistakes, especially disastrous mistakes. So the Gallipoli campaign stands out as his largest failure, I should say. And yet, despite what happened at Gallipoli, he took responsibility for it, resigned as First Lord. He learned what he could learn from it, and he went on to even greater heights as a leader. And that is really the quality of an individual. We're all going to experience failures. We're all going to make mistakes, in some cases, colossal mistakes. The question is, how are we going to handle them? Are we going to insist that we did not make a mistake, that it's other people's fault, that this was a plot against us? Or are we going to accept responsibility, make our mea culpa in a sincere way, and buckle down and learn from those failures, and then use that knowledge to go on to do better things in the future? And so that really, I think, is the key, is so much of the key to Churchill's success. So and I'm going to talk about something that's kind of related to that, and that is he innovated and he took risks. So of course the Gallipoli campaign was a risk, but he also he experimented with new technologies such as tanks in World War I, radar in World War II. He listened to his advisors who had ideas for new military technologies, and he was an absolute fountainhead of new ideas. In fact, I don't recall which military leader it was, but there was one who said, he came up with 100 new ideas every day, and the challenge was to sift through them to find the one that was potentially valuable. So Churchill came up with the idea for the sort of floating harbors that were used at Normandy after the beachhead was secured. They didn't work particularly well, but they had some utility. So he was always looking for, what can be done to make things more successful? What can we try? He was very, very open to trying new things and taking risks, and therefore risking failure. He learned often from failure and to come back ever stronger. So I think that those two lessons are ones that we in business really need to understand. So I was in a meeting this morning. I have this meeting the first Tuesday morning of every month, of each month. It's a group of military veterans. We get together and share business leads, etc. And then we do a breakout group. And one of our members has been experimenting a lot with various types of artificial intelligence, not just large language models, the sort of chat GPTs and such, but others. And one of the things I'm looking to do is to figure out, how do I automate the uploading of a video on one YouTube channel to another YouTube channel, right? And so my colleague, his name is Paul, with Honorable Marketing, Paul Makowitz, he suggested a tool called Make IA, which is an IA tool for automating processes, right? And so before the show, I had a few minutes, and I went on, and first I found something called Maker IA, and I'm like, this, I don't see where this will work. I'm thinking, Paul is crazy, right? And so they had an automated chat bot there, and I asked them, can you do this? And they say, no, we don't do this. And I thought, well, he actually didn't say Maker IA, he said Make IA. And so then I looked up specifically Make IA, and sure enough, there it was. And it appears that this is a tool that will accomplish what I need it to do. So, this idea of trying new things, innovating, this is something we have to be doing consistently in our businesses and professions if we want to stay competitive. If we're not doing it, our competitors are. Some of our competitors are, and they will roll over us. So we have to be willing to risk failure if we want to figure out how to use new tools, how to innovate, maybe take on a new line of work or something like that, and so that we can keep our businesses vital and at the tops of their fields. Okay, so those two go together. I think another lesson that we can learn from Winston Churchill's military career is the value and the power of strategic alliances. So, as I mentioned, the most notable being Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, right? Those three countries really secured victory for the Allies in World War II. And it was no small feat, as I've mentioned a couple of times already, keeping that alliance together. And Stalin was a dilettante of the First Order and extremely suspicious of Great Britain and the United States. And FDR was a dilettante of his own kind. He had an air of superiority that grated on a lot of people, including, by the way, my father, who frankly detested FDR all of his life that I knew him, certainly. And so it's not easy to keep together a strategic alliance like that. Now, during wartime, we will, it's understandable to work to keep together such fractious personalities in a strategic alliance. Now, in the business world, I'm not sure that we would want to create such a strategic alliance where the parties are suspicious of each other, where one of them is lording it over the others. I'm not sure that makes sense as a good strategic alliance. But even the best strategic partners who share the same goals, etc., can come to loggerheads. And so Churchill's example of mediating between his strategic allies, his strategic partners, and his success in doing that, that is where I think we can take the best lesson in when we talk about strategic alliances in business, right? So the key is to find good partners that can make long-term allies that the combination of the two or the three is greater than just the sum of the two or the three, if you know what I mean. And then work very hard to maintain those alliances. Okay. And the fact of the matter is, growing into a huge organization today for many of us is not necessarily the right thing to do. I know here in California, once you hit 5 employees, the regulation to which your business is subject is so onerous. I joked to someone last week when I was dealing with this that I had just been briefed on a number of new ways that California is trying to convince businesses to leave the state. It's truly extraordinary on some level. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. Okay, well. I forgot where I was going with that. Wow, having a senior moment. So, in any event, we want to build long-term alliances that will endure. And Churchill is a model in how to do that. Okay, next. Crisis management and decision making under pressure. So, whether it was the Battle of Britain, where the Luftwaffe was bombing German cities, killing civilians, forcing them to take shelter in the tubes, which is the subway. Whether it was the raining of V1 and V2 rockets on Great Britain toward the end of the war that also were killing civilians. These kinds of crises had to be properly dealt with so that the British would not lose heart and would continue to support the war effort. So we tend to look at World War II as the Allies inevitably were going to win. But if you can place yourself in the time, especially starting in the late 1930s, it was by no means a sure thing that the United States was going to enter the war. While FDR provided ever more support to Great Britain in terms of material, it wasn't until the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor that the United States was for sure going to enter World War II. And in fact, when the attack at Pearl Harbor was announced in England, Churchill supposedly sighed a huge sigh of relief because he knew at that point that the United States would come into the war. And at that point, he felt that the Allied victory was assured. Now, that was prescient on his part, but the United States was not at all prepared for war when we entered World War II at the very end of 1941. And in fact, the victories that we had in 1942 were tenuous at best. And for example, the victory at Midway really only happened because the naval intelligence broke the Japanese code, and so we knew that they were going to attack at Midway, and we were able to mount a defense that basically badly damaged the Imperial Japanese Navy. But none of these things were inevitable. It was not inevitable that the code was going to be broken. It was not inevitable that the Enigma code in Europe was going to be broken. It was not inevitable that the battle, the landings at Normandy on D-Day were going to be successful. So they were. It was not a given that Hitler was going to be defeated in the Battle of the Bulge. It was a near thing. So always what seems to be in hindsight, perfectly clear that this is how things were going to work out. No, not at all. There were always crises to be managed. There were always decisions that had to be made under enormous pressure. And Churchill was able to manage those crises and make those decisions, and oftentimes make the best decisions that could be made given the circumstances that were there. So, for example, FDR, in the very early in 1942, he wanted to go directly into mainland Europe and start fighting there. And Churchill was very skeptical of that. The American troops were really untested, and to go up against battle-hardened Nazi forces and Italian forces, he thought what would be a big mistake, because if the United States military suffered some big defeats early on in the war, he felt that might dishearten Americans and cause them to either sue for peace or withdraw, or just not fight as tenaciously as needed to happen. And so it was really Churchill who convinced Roosevelt to launch Operation Torch. That was the invasion of North Africa, where although the Desert Fox, the great German commander, I'm going up on his name. But anyway, although he was a brilliant German commander, he was sick, and so the American forces were the Africa Corps. Erwin Rommel. Rommel was a great commander, one of the best that the Germans had, but he got sick during the African campaign and had to go back to Germany for a while. And the fact of the matter is, the German troops in North Africa were not the elite of the elite. So Churchill had the good sense to see that the American forces needed to be blooded in a less harsh environment. Well, I mean, the desert environment was harsh, but I mean in a less militarily harsh environment, if you will, of North Africa before they attempted to fight the Nazis on mainland Europe. So this kind of decision making under pressure and the ability to help others make intelligent decisions, this was a skill that Churchill had. And this is something that we need to develop. So in our businesses, when we hit moments of crises, what do we do, right? And how do we help other people through it? So I see this. You might think, well, there's no such thing as a crisis in administrating probates. No, there are. Oftentimes things happen unexpectedly. It can derail an entire plan. How are those going to be handled? And one of the things I've seen is oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but at least sometimes, people want to sort of surrender to the forces that are trying to knock things off the rails in order to just get back on track as quickly as possible, and kind of throw money at the problem to solve it, rather than to think more strategically, more operationally, more tactically about how to deal with this. So part of my job in administrating a probate, especially, is to manage those crises effectively, and to make those decisions and get the other people involved on board so that we present a united front against whoever it is that's causing the problem, in the hopes of defeating that person or that group of people. Okay, so critical skill that we can learn from Winston Churchill's military career. Okay, and that goes along. So the crisis management and decision making under pressure. So that is of a part with being a good communicator, and especially a persuader. And two, that this is where again Churchill really shined. He was able to persuade his fellow countrymen to stay on board with backing the fight. He was able to convince Stalin and Churchill and later Truman what was the best direction to take oftentimes. And so the ability to communicate clearly, but in a way that moved people to act in the way that he saw it, was absolutely crucial to his success as a military leader. Okay, so, and look, part of it was there was a certain elan about Winston Churchill that was demonstrated from the time he was involved in the Boer War. So there was a certain charisma about him. But that was a charisma, I think, that he created. He was not born charismatic. He learned how to be charismatic. That may sound strange, but that is the case. And so we can learn to do that as well. We can learn to talk to other people in a way that attracts them to us, that causes them to listen to us. And when I say listen, I mean really hear what it is we have to say, so that we can exercise some persuasion over them. Now, I'm not suggesting that we become, con men. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is to develop the communication skills in order that people really take note of what we say, take it on board, think about it, and give us the opportunity to convince them that our perspective is a perspective, it is the perspective that they should adopt. Okay, and it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of gaining insight into people to be willing to talk to them, and most important, to be willing to listen to them. So much of being a good communicator is being a good listener. And Churchill was a good listener, notwithstanding all of his speeches and all of that. Churchill liked to talk to people, but he also loved to listen to people, to hear their ideas, and to see what he could find out from them that would be useful. And we can do the same thing. So I was having a conversation with someone, I think it was yesterday, talking about how submarine. So the captain of a submarine, if he's going to be successful, he learns to listen to every crew member, from the most junior to the most senior. And I remember what it was. So a friend of mine has a colleague who used to be a submariner, but he never became either an executive officer or the commanding officer of a submarine. And he was talking about that, and I said, well, the fact that he never attained that level of leadership is telling you something about his ability to communicate with the other sailors on the boat. Okay, a commanding officer of a submarine learns how to do that, and that is his greatest skill. And this individual based on what my friend was explaining about how he was behaving and the things he was doing, clearly hadn't learned that. Okay, so we don't have to command a submarine in order to learn how to listen to other people, hear them out, really focus on what it is they're trying to communicate to us, ask them questions so that we can better understand what it is they're telling us, etc. All of these are these communication skills are things we can learn, and in part we can learn them from studying Churchill's life. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there, and again urge you to study Churchill's life, study how he interacted with other people, how he gained insight into what was happening in the world, his political skills, all of these. He was a tremendously loyal individual. He was very loyal to his king and country. All of these are qualities that we can learn about by studying his life. And and beyond that, and if you saw my show Jiggers' Place last week, I was talking about the novel Ivanhoe. Churchill's life is also a rollicking good adventure story. And so in addition to what we can learn from it, we can also just enjoy the great adventures on which he pursued, and that all comes to life quite vividly. So real quickly, I'm just going to rehash the lessons that we can learn from Churchill's military career. First of all, the importance of leadership, especially visionary leadership, the importance of adaptability and learning from failure, coupled with being innovative and taking risks, knowing that we are going to fail sometimes, but that's all part of learning. Making strategic alliances and keeping them together. Learning how to manage crisis and to make decisions under pressure, especially by learning how to communicate well and to be persuasive. And then, I think I talked about building morale and trust as well. So, okay. So I thank you so much for joining me, especially those of you who join me live. It's always a kick to have you here. And so I appreciate it. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. I'm going to be talking about a book called The Art of Negotiating. It's a book that was written a number of decades ago. It's a classic, but it's one of the skills we need to master in any business or professional practice is to be able to negotiate. And so I'm going to give you some tips. I'm going to introduce you to that book and give you an idea of some of the things you can learn by reading the book. Okay, and then next week at 10 a.m. Pacific time, Monday, my show is Trust and Estates Weekly. My guest is going to be Hillary Cooper. Hillary Cooper has been on the show before. She is the queen of how do you deal with all the stuff that's left behind when somebody passes away. So we're going to continue to explore that subject with her. And then 7 days from today, we'll be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So thanks again for joining me, wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Courage at all times, my friends. And signing off as I always do, Marie, you are my bell, and